Hello, everyone. I hope this time of year is special for you. We've had Thanksgiving just go by, and we've got Christmas ahead of us, and we've also got Hanukkah and other religious days. This is an important time for getting together with friends and family and other believers. So I hope you have a joyous time of year. I want to talk a little bit about the temple during this time as we're looking forward to God coming back, to Jesus coming back. What's the temple got to do with it? The temple is one of the most important things for it. Maybe not the way you think. I'll try to cover that. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, the temple is important because, as we know, during the time of the Garden of Eden, man was separated from God. And God did everything he could to try to bring everybody back. And the plan eventually became, if you can do an earthly sacrifice to me on a regular basis to prove to me that you really care, then I will find a way to fellowship with you, essentially, is what it amounted to. The sacrificial blood became a covering to cover sin. Now, the temple was really first used when Moses led the people out of Egypt around 1500 BC. Now, their temple was actually called a tabernacle because it was portable. They have a walled-in curtain area to separate the actual center tent from the rest of the area. People of Israel were scattered around them on all four sides, depending on their tribes, if you will. And the sacrifices started. There was the altar, and inside the temple there was the two rooms, the Holy of Holies being in the back that held the ark, and in front in the other room was the large menorah, the table of showbread, and the table of incense. Pretty much the same components as used in the final building. And they traveled for 40 years using this. They should have gone right straight into the promised land, but they didn't. So they were punished with a 40-year delay. Eventually, David, who we know the story of David and Goliath, but eventually David becomes king and allows them to move in, but he wasn't allowed to build the temple. God said, "You're a man of war, so I'm going to give the privilege of building the temple to your son Solomon." We know some of his writings in the Bible. He was very wise and, in general, a good king. David, in general, is a good king, but he had his flaws. Solomon had his flaws too. But nevertheless, they were responsible for the first temple. David actually bought the property, the threshing floor property, for the temple, but never built it. The city of David is down at the bottom of the hill, and we've pretty much been learning about that in recent archaeology. It's fascinating what's underneath all the modern construction. You've got homes and parking lots built over ancient buildings. So we look at the Temple Mount up there, and there's all kinds of theories. And since we can't really get to it, the theories seem to flourish. Eventually, the temple will be rebuilt, but let's look at the original temple. The Solomon temple was built, sacrifices went on, but they didn't follow all of God's laws. It's almost like a soap opera watching the country of Israel and the Jews, because they misbehave, they get punished or conquered, they clean up their act, they go back to where they should be, and they misbehave, and it's just rinse and repeat. And when it comes to the temple, it gets destroyed, this gets rebuilt, it gets destroyed. You'd think people would learn, but they don't. The one thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. So anyhow, the Babylonians come in and conquer the area, take not all Jews, but they took the healthy Jews, and they took them back to Babylon, which is 1,500 miles away. And they stayed there for a number of decades. And at some point in time, and it was Nebuchadnezzar who ordered the initial assault attack. So you can put all these names together later on. But he eventually, current king, eventually lets them go back. But they don't all pack up and go. Now, we don't know the exact number that went into exile, but we're told that, 1 million Jews were wandering the desert. They got to the promised land. There's still going to be that many or more. But we're told that those that went back to Jerusalem were around 50,000. A lot of people got comfortable with living there. 70 years, that's a generation essentially. They had idol worship in Babylon, in Persia, which is Iran, modern day Iran. A lot of them didn't go back. Some of them that did go back eventually end up bringing some of those idols with them, which caused them trouble. And they probably repaired the temple. Unlike the Herodian temple, which was written about not one stone would be left on another, it didn't say that about the original Solomon temple, so it was probably rebuilt. Anyhow, by the time they got the temple repaired, the second temple, essentially, repaired and rebuilt, it was around 500 BC. And it stayed in that place until 70 AD when it was destroyed. And the only other significant thing that happened to it is that when Herod was appointed as the Jewish king, a puppet for the Romans, to appease them, he came in and did a massive rework of the temple, brought in some marble and gold and really made it look nice. Even the disciples of Jesus remarked at how amazing it was. And it was in that place until it was destroyed. Their sacrifices continued, and when it was destroyed, the Jews had to get together and figure out how they were going to maintain their religion, their belief in God and following the rules of God without a temple. So they came up with their, around 100 AD, they came up with their rules for doing that. We know that they have to have a third temple. You say, how do we know that? Well, in Revelations and in Matthew and a couple other places, it talks about the Antichrist defiling the temple. In order to defile, you have to have a temple. So we can expect a third temple to be built. But if you think about what's happening up there now, it would be impossible. And there's reason that it hasn't been built to this date. For 2,000 years, there's been no temple because they haven't maintained control of the Temple Mount area where the temple needs to be built. The Jews were scattered around the world as prophesied, but the Muslims lived there. Surrounding countries, they lived there. Babylon still exists, Persia. All that area is still Muslim controlled, and it was easy for them to just step in. There are some beliefs that the temple is really not supposed to be built on the Temple Mount. It was built in the city of David. Some of their arguments make sense, but other ones don't. And if it doesn't make 100% sense, you can't say that it's right. It talks about taking the ark up to the temple. You can't go up if you're already up, or if you're already at that level. So the Temple Mount is probably the correct place. Where? Until recently, they really didn't know where. And if it really gets right down to it, it would be nice to have it in the exact same spot, but maybe they don't have to. Maybe they could build a tabernacle in some of the shared space. It's not how God does things, but it might be how man could do it. It's really not something that they have to have. As a Christian, we know that the temple is no longer needed. But the Jews don't believe what the Christians do, the majority of them. And there's another snag. The majority of the Jews that live in Israel and in Jerusalem are Jews by birth, not by belief. They're not practicing. They're there because they're persecuted around the world and they come there for a safe haven. Yeah, safe haven with bomb shelters. But anyhow, we know the temple isn't needed as a Christian because the curtain was torn when Christ was crucified. An earthquake did that. So an earthquake could help solve the problem by removing the Dome of the Rock or the UNESCO Mosque or both. Or peace could come in such a degree is that they agree to relocate one or both of those away from the Temple Mount. Don't know what's going to happen. God may just knock them down with an earthquake, like it's happened before. But understand that what you're looking now, when you look at the Temple Mount, you're looking at the corroding expansion of the Temple Mount. The original Temple Mount was about half the size. We're told it was 500 cubits, the length of your arm, of the king's arm or the leader at the time. Recently, they found some stones that look to be from the right time period, and they found a corner. And if they measured out 500 cubits, they found areas that looked like it would be the spot for the original Temple Mount, and the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, is part of that square. So what they may have found where the actual original Temple Mount was. It was expanded twice. Another group did it before Herod did, but nothing major for them. Herod's actually claimed all of that area up there. But you really only need the center section, the original Temple Mount area, and that unfortunately is where the Dome of the Rock is. Now, again, I'm telling what people think. I'm not giving you my opinion here. Some people think that the story about Muhammad coming to Jerusalem and standing on that rock was made up with the sole purpose of claiming the rock and building the temple, the Dome of the Rock on it, to block the Jews from building a temple. And the same thing can go for the UNESCO Mosque, which was not originally a mosque. It was in another building, and then they claimed it as a mosque and put the dome on it. Are these true or not? I don't know. Peace would be an easy way to solve the problem. Getting along would be the right way to do it. It may take God to solve this. But in any case, the temple will be built back up on the mount. And I think the reason that God's going to allow it, it will unify the Jews. They're not unified now. And this would help to pull them together. See, he wants their attention. The 70th day of Daniel is for the Jews. It's to get their attention. They're still the chosen people. They have to share that now with Christians, but they are the original chosen people, and he made a promise to them. He's going to try to reach out to them, and having a new temple would help. There's an organization called the Temple Institute. You can find them at templeinstitute.org, I think it is. It might be .com, but I think it's .org. In any case, they're online. You can Google it. They've built everything that goes in the temple. They have the menorah, the gold menorah. There are copies of it around. They actually have a solid gold one. They have the table of showbread and the incense. They have all the curtains. They have everything inside. They have the plans to build the temple. They may have already stockpiled the stone. I don't know. they could put a tabernacle up on top immediately, and maybe off to the side while they finish building the third temple. They could be in sacrifices as soon as they have one other thing. There's one more obstacle. According to Jewish law, if you ever come in contact with a dead body, you're defiled. Even if you walk over a grave or where somebody has died, you're defiled. You almost can't walk anywhere in Israel and not be where somebody died, especially up there on the Temple Mount where there's been many battles. So they have to be cleansed. And the way you do that is take the ashes of a red heifer and mix it in some water, and you sprinkle it on the priests, for which they already have all their complement of priests, including a high priest. And you sprinkle it on the temple area in the temple, and everything is clean. And then you just stay away from dead bodies, or you recover yourself. Do they have a red heifer? They're trying to grow a red heifer. There's been one that we haven't heard about. One they disqualified recently, and then another one, they went silent. We didn't hear that it was disqualified, but we didn't hear that it was accepted. And there are other ones that are around now that are growing. You got to be a certain age. The red heifer, and it has to be without blemish, solid red, no other colors. And that's all it takes. And they can build the temple. So they got the red heifer, and the place to build it. As soon as they have those two together, the temple will be built. As soon as it's built, the sacrifices start, and they've been practicing sacrifices too. As soon as it's built and the sacrifices start, the Antichrist will come on the scene. Will we recognize him? I think personally Christians would recognize him. If Christians recognize him, his game's up and he's not going to get away with what he wants to do. So I think the rapture will happen about that time. I hope you have a great Christmas time. I look forward to meeting you in the sky. Until then, God bless.